Morning, ladies and gentlemen. This week for our literature lessons and for the next few weeks we are going to be concentrating on some of the poems in the anthology. Now, I know that you've studied some already. I'm looking at the last section of poems. If you have not got your anthology at home, don't worry, because I've put a copy of the poem onto the attachments on Show My Homework, so you can use that, and if you are able to, you can print it off to annotate on. And if you have not got a printer, never fear, you can copy the poem out into the middle of an A4 page and leave yourself enough room to complete your annotations like you would in a normal English lesson. So within this PowerPoint, there are some YouTube links which you need to click on. There will be a mixture of my teaching and your own research to help you understand this poem a little bit more. And this PowerPoint is going to last you a week's worth of lessons. There's lots of extra bits and pieces I want you to do independently, as well as just listen to me talking. So first things first, ladies and gents, we are going to be looking at the poem London by William Blake. And the first thing I want you to do is to copy out this timeline that's shown at the bottom of the PowerPoint. And I would like you to add some more events to specific things that happened in London, not in Britain, not in the UK, specific events that happened in London. So I've given you a rough starting point. I want you to add some things for 2018, 2020. I would like you to consider what happened in the beginning of the 1940s with regard to the Blitz. I would like you to just add some more information to this. Now, you can, if you want, do some research. You can click onto YouTube and you can have a look at events in London from Tudor times, and that will give you a list. It will give you either some films to watch, or you can find a list. But I would like you, please, to do this first. Copy out the timeline and add your own events to it, your own London events to it. This is probably going to take you a good 15-20 minutes to do properly, and I want you to be doing it properly. I want you to see how London evolved from the Tudor times up until 2020. So obviously pause this slide while you do that work, and then when you've done that, I'd like you to move on, please. Okay, so just a little bit of narrative from me. We obviously are looking at poetry, but I want you first of all to consider London through the eyes of an artist. So as well as poets, lots of artists have found inspiration in London. Here are 3 examples for you. So we've got Banksy, who's famous throughout Britain, but has included some of his artwork in London. We've got Monet, who was a French impressionist painter, but came and stayed some time in London and painted Waterloo Bridge and the House of Parliament, and several different paintings depict London. And then a modernist style photo with the House of Parliament, and then our famous buses. So it's not just poets that have inspired artists. We've got painters, photographers, writers, musicians as well. So let's move on. Okay, but obviously we've got to study the poets, and we are looking at the poem London, written by a gentleman by the name of William Blake. Now, William Blake was a romantic poet, which is completely and utterly different from the idea that we might have of the word romance. So the Romantics believed in freedom, in natural living, and they resented the way that London was changing and becoming more industrial. And the next task I want you to do, ladies and gents, is to research what Romanticism is. I would like you to research what it means. I would like you to research some of the famous poets that were involved. And on Blake's pretty little face up there in the right hand corner, there is a link to get you started. So you can click on the YouTube link, which is embedded in his picture. It is also attached to Show My Homework, but this is just a starting point. All right, please don't just watch what I've embedded on Blake's picture. I'd like you to do your own research so you really understand who the Romantics were, what they believed in, where they all originally came from. You are going to spend about 30 minutes on this research, and I would like you to make some notes so you have a good understanding of what Romanticism is. So in your books, on your paper, however you're working at the moment, on Word documents, you need to make some notes on Romanticism. There's a YouTube link, like I've said, but I want you to do your own research after that. You need to spend about 30 minutes on this task, so you can either pause me, come back to me, do whatever it is you want to do, but about 30 minutes on this task, and then we're going to move on. Okay, so I've set you a couple of tasks so far. You've completed the timeline. You should have found some interesting things out about the events that happened in London from Tudor times up into 2020. We've researched what Romanticism is. We understood what those group of painters, musicians, writers, poets all felt about society and what was happening. And before we go on to look at the poem itself, I want you to have a look at this famous painting. So this is a reproduction of Hogarth's Gin Alley. And he painted several paintings of 18th century life. And I want you to have a look and think about what you've understood about Romanticism and the Romantics, and have a look and see what horrors you can find within this picture. So take your time, press pause, go through and make a list of all the horrors that you can find in this picture. And then when you've done that, you can move on to the next slide. You're probably going to spend a good 5-10 minutes or so picking out all these little hidden clues that are within this picture. So pause me and then move on. Okay, so what I've done for you, ladies and gents, is I've picked out some of the ideas that are quite obvious within Hogarth's Gin Alley. And I've circled them in red, and I'm going to work in a clockwise fashion. So I'm going to start at the top where the building is crumbling, my first circle. So this represents the conditions of the buildings, the fact that people were building quickly and cheaply in London. They were exploiting those that didn't have enough money. They had no choice of where they lived. So buildings were put up quickly, they were put up in a dangerous fashion, and it was to exploit the poor, exploit those that had no choice about where they lived. And then we move on. And we've got in our top right picture a prediction that conditions were so bad for these people living in this part of London and that there was no way out for them. So we have the depiction that the conditions were so bad, there's no way out for them. And unfortunately, some people had no other option. And then we have a fighting, lots of fighting people, but specifically in my red circle, we have two people that were fighting. So this is a warning about the horrors of gin, the idea that people drank gin as a way to kind of blur the problems that they had in life. And this is a depiction of what that gin did to people, made them angry, made them aggressive. We've got the depiction of people fighting. But then in the bottom right-hand corner, depicts the idea of poverty, that people were starving, that they could not earn money. They had no security in jobs, and people were starving in the streets. And then we move to the middle of the picture, and we have the baby that you can see that is falling from the mother's arms, and another depiction of the horrors of gin. So the idea that this mother is so drunk that this baby is falling from her arms and falling into the abyss, and that there is nothing that can save either of them. And then just above the mother, you can see that there is a gentleman in a coffin. This is the idea of a pauper's grave, so someone that could not afford to have a funeral. The idea that there were so many people that were dying that coffins were cheap and crassly put together, just so that people could be buried and moved along. And then finally, on the left-hand side, the very far left-hand side of the picture, one circle but two ideas. So the gentleman who has been circled with the red circle has a mask on. He is a pawnbroker. He is someone that would give you money for your belongings in the hope that you would be able to live, buy yourself some food, buy yourself some fuel for the fire, pay your rent, and then if you got a job, you could go back and you could redeem the things that you had pawned. So the three balls that are at the top of that building, that's the symbol for a pawnbroker. Now, he wears a mask because very often the pawnbrokers were very corrupt. They gave you very little money for your belongings. Very often you had no chance at all of redeeming those valuables, those possessions back, and they sold them on at a vast profit. So the pawnbroker is masked. You could almost say that it was like a devil's mask. And there's a huge queue in front of the pawnbrokers. There's people fighting to sell their belongings. People were so desperate for money. So this is Hogarth showing people's representation of their desperation for money. So I know we've not even looked at the poem yet. I know that you've done some research on London. You've done some research on Romanticism. We've looked again at the art, and poetry and art are very closely linked when we look at Romanticism. So I wanted us to have a look at this painting first of all, and the horrors that are easily shown to us, to see whether, as we study the poems, we can find those horrors, we can find that same message within what the poets are saying to us. So let's move on. Okay, so again, we've still not even got to the poem yet. You're going to do a little bit more work for me. Before we read the poem, I just want to tell you a little bit about William Blake. So William Blake published his poems into two books. He published Songs of Innocence, and then he also published Songs of Experience. And when we think about the things that Romantic poets liked and didn't like, why do you think he published a book called Songs of Innocence and a book called Songs of Experience? I want you to have a go at answering that question in a full sentence, and then underneath, consider the idea of innocence, the importance of innocence. What does that suggest? Does that link to the first question? And then thirdly, a question for you to answer. Do you think that anyone could say that London is an innocent place? So back then, when we think of Hogarth Gin Alley, and now. So think about the two ideas. Is London an innocent place? So I want you to answer those three questions. And then before we move on, I want you to research William Blake himself. I want you to research the man that William Blake was, how he came to be a romantic writer, the poems that he included in his Songs of Innocence, the poems that he included in his Songs for Experience. You are going to do this independently. I have not provided you any links for this research because I want you to do this independently. I need you to make some notes on William Blake. It's really important that you understand the context of these poems. So you understand Romanticism, you understand Blake, where he was coming from, what his life was like, before we even consider looking at any of these poems. So Obviously, I need you to answer these 3 questions that I've set for you, and then I want you to do some independent research on William Blake. I'd like you to make some notes. I don't care if it's a spider diagram, a list, however you need to format those notes in your book so you will remember. That's what I want you to do. It's going to take you about another half an hour to do this research. So, as I said, this PowerPoint are our 3 literature lessons for the whole of the week, because I want you to spend half an hour on researching William Blake. And then when you've done that, then you can move on. Okay, yay, we've got to the poem. How exciting for you. So we've independently researched Romanticism. We've independently researched William Blake. If you've not done those 2 things, before you start on the poem, you need to go back and do those 2 things, because it's very difficult to analyse a poem effectively if you know nothing about the poet and the time that they were writing in. So go back, please, if you've not done what I asked you to do before we start on this poem. So it's all very exciting. There's another embedded link here. If you press on where it says click here, you can hear the poem read to you. So please, by all means, you can do that if you would like. And if not, you can just read it through yourself. I'm not going to read the poem to you. I've provided someone to read it who's much more qualified than me. So please listen to the poem being read to you. And then before anything else, before we even look to annotate this, I would like you to check out this word bank. So within this poem, there are a variety of words that you may not yet be familiar with, which is absolutely fine. It often happens when we study these poems for the first time. So I've prepared a word bank for you. It's entirely up to you how you make a note of this word bank. You might want to annotate it straight onto your poem. You might want to put the word bank at the bottom of your anthology. Sorry, I couldn't remember the word then. At the bottom of your anthology, you might want to put the word bank into your book. I don't mind, but you need to know what these words mean. You need to be able to link them up. So before you do anything, you need to listen to the poem being read, and then you need to copy out the word bank. So press pause until you've done those 2 things. Okay, so I'm hoping that you've done the 2 tasks that I wanted you to do. And now what you're going to do is you're going to have a go at independently analysing the words and the phrases in this poem to consider what you think Blake's feelings were about what was happening in London. Okay, what message was he trying to get across? So it's not just about randomly spotting techniques. It's not about picking out, I don't know, repetition. Oh, great, I've found some repetition, and not considering why he's used that repetition. What message was it he was trying to get across? So annotate your copy of the poem, either in your anthology, the one that you've copied out yourself, the Word document that you have printed off. Whichever one you want to do, I don't mind. Now, obviously, there's only 4 stanzas. There's only 4 lines in each stanza, but it's a new poem to us. So you need to spend 25 minutes annotating this poem, all the while considering what you think Blake's message was. So use the word bank to work out the meanings of some of the words you don't know, and annotate it. Don't just feature spot. Don't just find those metaphors, that repetition, that alliteration. Think about why Blake used it. So have a go. You can press pause. You'll be delighted that I won't be talking at you. Press pause, spend 20 minutes, annotate this poem, and then we will move on. Okay? Right, so ladies and gents, I have annotated this poem a little bit for you. All right, so I know that some of us annotate and understand really well these poems, and other of us that don't. Okay, so this is something that I did a couple of years ago, which enables me to write onto a PowerPoint But obviously, it's just notes, and I'm going to talk through it. And as I talk through, you can add to your annotations. Please don't think that your annotations are incorrect. If you think something different to me, that's fine. Right, okay, first things first. So, you are obviously going to be able to replay this. You are obviously going to be able to pause me while you make your notes. But like I said, this is 3 lessons worth of literature, so I am going to be talking for quite a long time. So first things first, we want to look at the first person narrative. So that personal pronoun, I, the first word in this poem, I, it's a first person narrator, which means that the poem is personal. The poem is more real, okay? And then we have someone that wanders. So the idea of wandering makes it sound like there is no purpose for his walking. He's just aiming at kind of ambling around. It could reflect, if you wanted to, on the idea that Blake feels that he is powerless to do anything. So his walk is more of a wander than a walk with a purpose, because he, as a poet, feels he is powerless to change what is happening. And then we have the idea that he walks through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. So it suggests that the whole city is affected by what's going on. It's not just one small area. And then we can move on. All right, so we move on to the 3rd and 4th lines in this. A mark of every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. So a couple of things that we can pick out here. So we have this repetition of marks, okay, and marks that do not leave you. So ideas of physical marks, but ideas of emotional marks as well, marks that are harming everybody around him, because he quantifies that with the idea of every face I meet. He sees weakness, he sees woe, these people that cannot change the situation that they are in. And the idea that the Thames, with all its power, its natural power, can't help the humans. Right, let's move on to the next stanza. So in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. So we have repetition of every 4, no, can't count, 5 repeated words. Okay, so this is showing us that this is happening to rich and poor alike, that everybody is being affected by this. It emphasises the bleakness that everybody is feeling about the situation. And the idea also that it affects old and young. We have every man, every infant's voice. And then we move on to the mind-forged manacles. Okay, so a metaphor. Everybody is trapped. Nobody can leave the situation that they're in. So they're trapped by attitude. They're trapped by thoughts. They're trapped by lack of money. Completely and utterly trapped. And then we have this personal pronoun again, I hear. So because he's reiterating with the word I, it makes it more distressing. It makes it more hellish. It makes it a real vivid experience for the reader. Okay. Right, so our last 2 stanzas. How the blackened chimney sweeps cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. So we've got a few things here. We've got the idea of the chimney sweeper's cry, So here we know, you should know, if you researched William Blake, if you researched Romanticism, the idea of child labour. So chimney sweeps were often very young children. So this is an emotive image of child labour, something that the Romantics were very much against. So the chimney sweeps cry, they are stuck, there's nowhere for them to go. And we've got every blackening church. So the churches are black. And there's two ideas from this. They are black from pollution. They are black from the smoke that is being churned out of the factories that are in London, the processing. But also the idea of the blackening church, the idea of black and white. So black being evil, and the church with all its money not helping those people that are in need. So the blackening church appalls. So the idea that the church, which is a really rich institution, were not helping those in need, and therefore the church itself is blackened. The church itself is evil, and the church is to blame because of its own greed, withholding funds and not helping those people in the parish. And then the soldiers hapless soldiers sigh. So sibilance there. All right, the soldiers were had to go to war. They had no choice, and the blood runs down the palace walls. So the royalty are to blame. But they are the ones that they don't suffer. They've got money. They have enough money. They're not suffering. It's the hapless soldiers, the soldiers that have no choice but to go to war. So this could have connotations, could have links to the French Revolution. If you've done your research on Romanticism, you might think about the research through that. So let's look at our last stanza. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlots curse, blast the newborn infant's tear, and blights the plagues on marriage hearse. So quite a few things here. And again, we've got this personal pronoun, I hear. So he's not just walking during the day, he's walking at night as well. So we have vivid images of daytime and nighttime, and the fact that it's awful whether it's day and night. Okay, how the youthful harlots curse. So here we have a juxtaposition. Okay, the youthfulness, the innocence of youth, but with the sordidness of prostitution. So a harlot is a prostitute. You should have got that from the word bank. But the juxtaposition, the youthful harlot's curse. And it's a curse that children are innocent and suffering. And there could be two interpretations of the word curse. So a curse is something that's put upon someone. You can curse someone, and the idea that London might have a curse upon it with the influx of all these people and the poverty that's strung up around it, and the gin alleys and the prostitution, because people are so desperate for money. But also just in terms of the word curse, so to swear, it could be the prostitute swearing. So you've got two interpretations of that idea. And then we have blast the newborn infant's tear. So again, that juxtaposition, the harlots and the infants that come from the prostitution, the innocence of the newborn babies is immediately lost because the innocent are suffering. They are damaged immediately by the society that they are born into. And then our final line, and the blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So a couple of things here. Really powerful language, the blights with plagues. Okay. It's all about the idea of illness and disease. So a blight is a kind of disease. A plague is a kind of disease. The idea that this is something that's uncontrollable, it's unstoppable and destined to affect a lot of people. And then we have the oxymoron at the end, the marriage hearse. So two ideas, two words that don't go together. You don't get a marriage hearse. A hearse is something that unfortunately you transport the deceased away in. So the idea that we've got this happy marriage, but then linked so closely to death because everything has been destroyed. Everything is being destroyed. So we've got contrast in this last sentence, the innocence of the youth, but the experience of the prostitutes, the innocence of the marriage, the experience of the death, the hearse. So, ladies and gents, that's my annotations to help you with your annotations. If you would like to, you can also research a little bit more. So you don't have to do this if you don't want to. For those of you that are pushing those high marks, so if you're looking 7s to 9s, and there are a lot of you listening to this that should be doing that, you might want to research some more analysis of this poem. So don't just take my word for it. Listen to somebody else. Pick and choose about the different ideas around this poem. So if you want to, you can just type in William Blake's London analysis into YouTube, and you will have a whole host of individuals that will be willing to help you with the analysis. So we're going to move on though. Okay. So, ladies and gents, we've learnt about Romanticism, we've learnt about William Blake, we have read through and analysed William Blake's poem London, and now we're going to think about this question, okay? How did William Blake show his attitude to power, so those that had power, those that were in charge, the rich, in his poem London, okay? When you write your responses to these poems, from your anthologies, you do need to make sure that you have a real understanding of the contextual issues surrounding the poems, as well as the language, okay, which is why I wanted you to do all that research first of all. Now, in your books, I want you to write this question, or on your paper or your Word documents, whatever you're doing it on, and I want you to plan how you would answer this question. What quotes will you take from Blake's poem London to show his attitude to power? What was it he felt about power? So I want you to make a plan. Okay, this plan I'd like you to spend 15 minutes on, because I want you to pick your quotations really carefully. I want you to ensure that your quotations, when you use them in a response, will be able to show Blake's attitude to power. What did he feel about it? That the power of the church was wrong, that the soldiers had no power, that the people had no power, that the conditions were affecting everybody. Think about those ideas as you make your plan. Obviously, pause me, make your plan before we move on. But this is, again, another 15 minutes of planning. Okay, so, woohoo! Obviously, we are going to look at this question. Obviously, you are going to have a go at writing a response. But what I wanted to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I wanted to give some of you some assistance. So I've written for you the start of an answer, okay? So Blake shows his distaste for the way that power is corrupted in London. He talks about London negatively and makes statements about different things that he thinks are wrong. In the first stanza, he asserts how every face sees the marks of weakness, marks of woe. Blake's use of the word every shows that these feelings affect the whole population, whilst his repetition of marks makes it seem as if London has literally carved these feelings into its inhabitants. The power has been abused in London, And as the country's leading political centre at the time, Blake is making a direct statement about how it is run. Okay. So, ladies and gents, here's the start of an answer for you. And I want to reinforce the fact that this is only the start of an answer. I am more than happy if you wish to copy this out into your books. You might want to think about where I am answering the question. So my first sentence answers the question. That's my what. What is it that Blake is trying to say? And then I move on to how. How does he say it? Where are my quotes? My quotes is my how. How does he say this? And my why. Why does he say this? Well, he wants us to understand that he believes that the power is affecting everyone in London, that everybody is suffering from what's happening, and the power is being abused in London. Okay, so I move away in my teaching from PEA paragraphs to what, how, and why. I think they're easier to use. What I would like you to do, ladies and gents, so obviously you can copy this out, you can pause me, you can copy this out so you have this beginnings of a sample in your book. But what I would like you to do is I'd like you to now go back and use your plan. And I'd like you to try and answer this question. What do you think is Blake's attitude to power? And how does he show that attitude? What words and phrases does he use? I'd like you to write for 25 minutes. Obviously, you've already planned, but I'd like you to write for 20 to 25 minutes answering this question. Remember, you need to include quotations. If you can include subject terminology, great. You need to make sure that you are answering the question. So you need to use the word power in your answer. And you need to think about what Blake felt about London and society and what was happening. And don't just write your contextual information kind of as a standalone paragraph. Try and embed it into the ideas, into your analysis. So like I said, give yourself 20 minutes. For those of you that struggle and aren't sure quite how to start poetry responses off, I've also included a structure strip which I use in my classes, which will help you structure an answer. All right. So I've attached it to the Show My Homework along with the copy of the poem and the various YouTube clips. So, ladies and gents, write for 20 minutes. Try and make sure you include quotations. Try and make sure you are answering that question. Try and make sure that your analysis, your why, is detailed. What is it he wants us to think? What is it his message? What is his message that he's trying to get across? So, ladies and gents, this is your 3-lesson lit lesson. Hopefully you've taken the time to do the research. Hopefully you've taken the time to make the notes. You've taken the time to do your own analysis. Maybe a little bit more on YouTube, but now this is your own work. So 20, 25 minutes writing time. Please, if you wish to, you can send your responses into your individual teachers, not back to me. But you don't need to send your analysis or your research or anything else. You can just send your response to this question. And I will post another one next week. Thanks very much.